Good evening. My name is Karen Romano, and I'm the current president of the Book Industry Guild of New York. And I really am delighted to welcome you to tonight's program, Nurturing Readership, which is focusing on how libraries work with publishers for reading inclusivity. I'm guessing that we all have early memories of going to our local library with parents or teachers or friends and the treasure hunt that ensued after that. But I recently moved back to my childhood neighborhood, and I had the opportunity to step back into my first library. And although the building was renovated and the stacks were updated, I was amazed at how time constricted and the old familiar excitement of being on the edge of discovery and what I was going to be handed, all of that came back, and I swear it even smells the same. But that might be a function of the neighborhood I live in, I don't know. But but libraries connect us in ways that few places do. So with the help of our wonderful panel tonight, we're going to explore how libraries are becoming more inclusive, are working with publishers and communities, and continue to support literacy and build relationships within those communities. I am very happy to be able to introduce our moderator for tonight's discussion, Alessandra Affinito. Ali is a children's librarian at the Chatham Square branch of the New York Public Library in Chinatown, where she has worked for the past 7 years. With her undergraduate degree in international studies and a master's in library and information science with a focus on youth services, she enjoys serving the diverse communities of New York City, and she is especially passionate about language learning, STEAM projects, and graphic novels. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Ali. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Karen. Hello, good evening, morning, whenever you're watching this video. I'm so glad to have everybody here, and thank you to our speakers. So we have a lot of fantastic questions today about delving into inclusivity in both the libraries and publishers and how we can mix those two together. So I'm going to get started and just introduce our speakers. So first we have Melissa Cardinali, who is a literacy teacher, librarian, and consultant in children's publishing and works for the NYC Department of Education. She lives in New York City with her husband, 2 young sons, and too many books to fit in their apartment. Something I can very much relate to. And Hannah Ehrlich is the Director of Marketing and Publicity at Lee & Low Books, where she has spent over a decade working to connect diverse books with enthusiastic readers. Some of the award-winning titles that she has the pleasure of working on and that I've had the pleasure of reading include When Aiden Became a Brother, Zombies Don't Eat Veggies, and Under the Mesquite. Hannah was also an integral part of the planning behind Lee & Low's landmark diversity baseline surveys, which we're going to talk about in a little bit more depth as we go in, which measure 4 dimensions of diversity within the book publishing industry workforce. She graduated from Tufts University with a degree in English and Media Studies. And then we have Julie Leung. By day, Julie is the marketing director for Random House's sci-fi fantasy imprint, a personal favorite of mine, Del Rey. By night, she writes children's books, including the upcoming Fearless Flights of Hazel Ying Lee, and she's a nerd 24/7. Also can relate. And last but certainly not least, we have Shelley Diaz Vale, who is the current reviews editor at School Library Journal. Prior to that, she worked at Book Ops, which is the technical collaboration service that works for both the New York Public Library and the Brooklyn Public Library purchasing books. And she worked as a supervising librarian selecting children's and YA materials. She served on YALSA's Best Fiction for Young Adults and Excellence in Nonfiction committees. And she's also an adjunct professor at Queens College, Graduate School of Library and Information Science, where she teaches young adult literature. Welcome to all of you. Thank you so much again for joining us tonight. So to get started, I like to start with something easy, something to get us warmed up a little bit. So it's summer, we've got a lot of things going on. And if you would love to share with us, we'd love if you would share with us what is on your summer to be read list. I'm gonna go ahead and pick on somebody first. So let's say, Shelley, why don't you start us off?
Hi, everyone. Thanks again for giving me this opportunity to be on this panel. In honor of Eric Carle, the wonderful Eric Carle, I have a newborn. He's 4 months and a 4-year-old. So we've been reading some of our goal is to read all of Eric Carle's books. So, so the last book we read, I forget the full title, but it's about a sloth, which, you know, we always think a very hungry caterpillar, but I didn't know that he wrote a book about sloths. So that's what we're doing this summer.
And I'll let anybody jump in, but I'll let y'all.
I can go next. Thank you, Ali. I'm so excited to be here. Librarians are like my favorite people in the world. So I love talking about libraries and how we work together. I have been reading a lot of romance since COVID began because it's been an interesting time. And that's probably, I'm just going to ride that wave into this summer. So I know that there's a new Casey McQuinn novel just out. She's the author of Red, White, and Royal Blue, which just made me so happy to read. So I'm super excited about her next one. And then also the newest novel in the Graceling universe by Kristen Kishore. Those are two on my list for the summer.
I can hop in because my toddler is quiet for 5 seconds. I just finished Blackwater Sister by Zencho, and it is one of my favorite reads of the summer so far. It's about a girl who starts hearing the voice, the ghost of her grandmother in her head, and her grandmother used to be a medium for a vengeful god. So amazing, really, really good. And then my children's recommendation is I can't wait to read When You Trap a Tiger by Tay Keller. And that was the winner of this year's Newbery Medal. And I got to do an event with her wearing my author hat recently. And so I'm super excited to dive into that.
Hi, everybody. I'll jump in now. Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here. I'm reading, I just started, and it's just summer, The Three Mothers, How the Mothers of MLK Jr., Malcolm X, and James Baldwin Shaped a Nation. And I just started it, so I can't share too much, but so far it's pretty fantastic. I love it because it really sheds light on the fact that these guys just didn't come out of nowhere and change the world, right? They were all born into families of activists and leaders. And so as a mom of boys, I think it's sort of especially motivating and inspirational. I probably won't be reading it to my kids because they're 7 and 8, but they are reading they just started the Peter and Ernesto graphic novel series, and it has sloths in it. So we're all pretty excited about that. And my older one is reading, he's very excited to read The Dragon Thief, which is the second part of the Dragons in the Backpack series, which, you know, it's like magic and eccentric grandparents and Park Slope, and they are pretty excited about that. So happy summer reading.
Yes, wonderful. I definitely added a couple to my list just mentally as we were going through that. So let's jump into the topic of this evening. A lot of people think of publishers and libraries as these two separate entities that, you know, kind of work towards some of the same goals, but maybe not necessarily together. So let's go ahead and smash that assumption and talk about some of the things that libraries, if you're a librarian, what you do with publishers, and publishers, what you do with libraries, current projects you have going on, things that you enjoyed doing, and just get the ball rolling on introducing some of those ideas. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pick on one of you guys to start. So let's see. Hannah, let's start with you.
Sure. So a lot of my job in marketing at Lee & Low is working directly with librarians. I feel like librarians are tastemakers. They're kind of on the front lines of bridging the gap between publishers and readers. And so there's a lot of work that we can do together to make sure that books find their audiences. At Lee & Low, you know, one of the projects that we have done has been working on kind of guidelines to help people reflect on the inclusivity of their collections. And so we've had a lot of librarian feedback on that. We also send books directly to librarians across the country at various stages of publication for, for reviewing and for considering for inclusion in their programming. We pitch authors for a lot of programming directly with libraries. We've had lots of authors at Brooklyn Public Library, New York Public Library, and virtual events throughout the country, which has been really amazing. And maybe we'll talk more about that later. And we have also partnered with libraries on some ebook projects to make, like the Open Ebook Initiative, which came through the Obama administration, to make ebooks accessible to students from Title I schools. And that program went through the New York Public Library. So there are so many different ways and touch points that we have with libraries, but those are just like a couple of the projects that we have worked on or have in the works. Yeah.
And how about you popcorn it over to whoever, or if anybody has something they'd like to jump in with, feel free.
I can hop in real quick since, Hannah and I both work in marketing roles at the publishers. And as Hannah said, oh God, sorry, I knew that was going to happen. But one of the things that I think about when it comes to book marketing is that we're essentially matchmakers of a book to a reader. We're trying to find you the perfect read at all times. And I think in a lot of ways, libraries and librarians function the same way. They are sort of a place where a reader comes to find their perfect book. And so in a lot of ways, our goals are so aligned. And I love working with libraries so much because not only do they service as books, but they're also cultural centers, right? And not only is it books, but a lot of times kids come there for after school programming, they come there for events. And one of my favorite things that I get to do with libraries, we do a lot of pop culture conventions at Del Rey, being the science fiction fantasy imprint. We go to San Diego Comic-Con, we go to New York Comic-Con, but then at the same time, a lot of libraries do their own smaller events. These huge conventions aren't always accessible to everyone. And there's still a lot of fans out there who want to meet other fans. And so I've found that a lot of libraries like to create sort of mini events that kind of mimic the con atmosphere, but on a much smaller scale. And I work closely with our library marketing team. We've put together these sort of kits that if a library wants to put on, their own sort of pop culture Comic-Con, we can send them some free books, free bookmarks, essentially the same things we would have taken to a giant convention, but the libraries can distribute. And, I also work on Minecraft books and Star Wars books and Magic the Gathering books, and all of these sort of have, game extensions that libraries also, take on as part of their services. And, I'm looking at Ali because she and I used to run a Magic the Gathering book club, Magic the Gathering club together at one of the branches. And so all of this to wrap into one giant bow, I think, there's just so much beyond just books that libraries represent in my heart and in my business. I'll pop it over. My child's starting to cry out. Over to Melissa.
So I don't work for a publisher or a library. I'm a teacher, but I love to bring my kids to the library. I think there's a lot of connections like we've heard already. And I am really excited now for more opportunities. I feel like our kids are so desperate for some kind of symbiosis to really, bring them back into these spaces, whether it's a school library or a public library. Everything's been closed for so long, and the kids, I think, are just really excited for it. And so I hope that there are a lot of new, fun, exciting, welcoming projects for them, starting in the summer and certainly beyond.
I think, is that my turn now?
Yes.
Yes. So at SLJ, I feel like we're kind of a connector for a lot of the audiences and the libraries and publishers and readers and librarians, which is why I love my job. And what we try to do as much as we can is surface, obviously, the books that the great publishers are sharing to the world, and give librarians the tools that they need to make purchasing decisions. And when I was at Book Ops, we relied so heavily on reviews. Often we don't get to see many of the physical copies, or we, as much as people think our job is, we don't get to read every single book that ever gets on the shelf. How I much wish that was my job, but we rely a lot on reviews in order to make those decisions. And so now that I'm back at SLJ, I consider that my utmost responsibility, because librarians have very, very small budgets and they're dwindling every day. So, especially for school librarians who have to manage just one budget, there are some school libraries that, first of all, don't even have a certified librarian there. And if they do, they have a tiny, tiny budget, to the point where librarians have to do their own fundraisers, find their own grants. So we want to make sure that these libraries are purchasing books that are relevant to their school's curriculum, serve the needs of all the kids in their communities, whether as windows or mirrors, to quote Radine Sims Bishop. And so that's our responsibility, to make sure that librarians have those tools. We also have collection development pieces, which are essentially features or articles where we round up books according to a theme. So if a librarian is looking for books about the environment, then we try to package as many titles as we can, as diverse titles as well, not just for the Heritage Months or et cetera, but make sure that every list that we have includes as many identities as we can. So yeah, I really feel like SLJ and the review journals are kind of connectors between or among all the different groups that are represented here.
Thank you so much, Shelley. And I feel like that's a really good bridge about what I was sort of moving to talk about next, which is inclusivity in all of our different roles. So excuse me, Melissa, I know you're not a librarian or a publisher, but you're so steeped in the literacy community that I think you have a unique perspective. And indeed, all of you kind of have a different role. Like Julie, you do several different things, wear several different hats, as you're saying, within the publishing and library industry, as well as the author and creation industry. So I want to delve in more on those specific roles, right? Are your specific organizations or your projects? Shelley touched on this with her Book Ops experience specifically. How are they working towards inclusivity, and what does that mean in your field? I'd love to move into that. So yeah, anybody who'd like to speak, please do so.
I mean, I can talk about Leon Lowe, because Leon Lowe Books as a publisher is focused on diverse books, and that's been the focus of our publisher since it was founded 30 years ago. So, Leon Lowe has always had a focus on inclusivity, both in terms of the characters in our books, as well as like our authors and illustrators. And I think over time that has grown to include different dimensions of identity and different types of inclusivity. And actually librarians have played a really important role in that, because we take their feedback so seriously. And so we have heard from librarians over the years about various gaps in their bookshelves, things that they can't find. One of my favorite things at ALA every year, the American Library Association conference, which hopefully one day we'll be back to in person. But one of my favorite things to do is just to be at the booth and have librarians come up to us and ask us for different books that fit the needs of their communities. And then we always take that feedback back to our editors and, and think about it in terms of acquisitions. And that really makes a difference in terms of how we grow our list and how we think to grow our list. So I think that is a really important way that like the partnership between librarians and publishers can lead to more inclusivity, because librarians are really the ones on the front lines who are seeing what's there and what's not there, and what patrons are asking for and having trouble finding.
Yeah, and Hannah, I wanted to talk a little bit more about a specific resource that I personally have used in my library, the Leon Lowe Diversity Audit, and the sort of like check your shelves. And can you tell us a little bit more about the specific resources that you make for libraries to be used in libraries, and maybe throw a link in the chat if you have one?
Yeah, absolutely. I will throw a link to that that questionnaire in the chat. So we created that questionnaire because we were getting a lot of people coming to Lee and Low and asking us for help or guidance on how to make their book collections more inclusive. And so we wanted to put together just a series of questions that would get people thinking about what is or isn't in their collection and where they may have blind spots. With the intention not to make people feel bad or feel guilty, but really just to get people to be able to kind of do audits of their list and think about places where there was room to grow. So we put that out several years ago, and it's been one of our most used, most popular resources. We see it used by teachers in classroom libraries, by librarians, public librarians, school librarians. We just created a new edition for families to use in their home libraries as well. Because I think those questions can kind of guide people in different ways depending on the professional capacity in which they're collecting books. And so beyond that, we try to create other resources that are helpful in sort of guiding people to think about bigger questions of inclusivity as they relate to our books and just the larger book ecosystem. So, we've done various webinars on different topics that people have asked about. We have a lot of different book lists that round up, as Shelley said, books thematically, but that are also diverse and reflect a range of identities. So, social emotional learning book lists, social activism, anti-racism, those kinds of things. And yeah, I mean, we try to really be responsive to what people are asking for. So we have a pretty active educational sales and literacy team as well. And they're talking to people out in, librarians and teachers and other educators a lot. And when we get the same questions over and over, we know that there's a need for those types of resources. And that's kind of how we, that directs what we create, I guess I should say.
Fantastic. And in the spirit of that, I know that we have some participants on here, and I know that the chat is for the the Q&A is for you to ask us questions, but I would love to know if you're able to respond in the chat, like, where are you coming from in this webinar? Are you a parent looking for resources on how libraries pick their books? Are you a publisher looking for ways to interact? I would love to, if you get a chance listening out there, if you want to pop in the chat sort of what your role is and what perspective you bring to this. We'd love to hear that, so we can sort of steer our discussion in a way that will be most helpful to you. So continuing with that, so we're talking about how specifically our different groups use inclusivity from different perspectives. I'd love to move it to Julie, because she has like all these different hats, and so does Melissa. So maybe perhaps after that, you have author, marketer, mother, all those things. So tell us a little bit about how that works in your day-to-day.
Oh man, that's a lot of different ways to tackle this question. I would say, Anna brings up such a great point in terms of libraries being the place where we get feedback. And that is definitely true on the marketing side for us as well. Oftentimes, libraries and bookstores are sort of the places where readers get to ask for what they want. They are looking for guidance. They're looking for what to read next. And these gaps can be easily identified immediately once the reader starts asking for a certain book and we're coming up empty-handed. And so I would say, like, in terms of inclusivity and what our role is as marketers is just listening to librarians and booksellers tell us what's missing on their shelves. And then the other flip side of it, when we're sort of thinking about how we are allocating our budgets, how are we prioritizing which titles to feature, beyond just focusing on these themed heritage months, is how do we incorporate inclusivity across every single campaign, regardless of whether or not it is themed to a month or not. Like, it can be about anything, but the list must be diverse. And that's kind of, as, hopefully publishing catches up to the makeup of America, publishing will be able to recognize that, like, it can't just be siloed, themes like for certain months. It has to be throughout every single campaign. Everything from author blurbs to, basically like if it is just like a summer reading campaign, is that summer reading campaign diverse? And just as an author, I guess switching my hats real quick, what I've always wanted to write about has been about Asian Americans, just to make up for the lack of, when I was growing up in Georgia, I didn't really have a lot of picture books or books. Lawrence Yep and, Amy Tan were in, like Maxine Hong Kingston were like the three that sort of stood out to me as like the first time I got to see, my culture was represented. And I think that's changed so much since then. And what I've really, really value about the current landscape is that, for Asian Americans in particular, like there's a monolith to be broken apart. And the only way to break apart that monolith is to have multiple narratives, a million different types of voices out there. And I, as an author, that is where I feel the most heartened when I think about the future, more so than, on my business side, when I see sort of how many different people are out there writing stories, and those stories then get lifted by the publishers and prioritized by the publishers. And I'll pass to Melissa.
So yes, everything Hannah said and Julie said, so well put. I will add, as a teacher and a mom, I feel like a lot of times kids, they don't know what's missing unless you show them. And I think in school libraries and in the classroom, we get so used to the canon and we get so used to the same books, the same tried and true books that are woven into the curriculum. And I think it's changing, and I think it is becoming more diverse. And I think exactly what Julie said, this can't just be like, a February initiative. This has to be woven into the curriculum. This is how we teach it. These are the books. We are representing the kids in our classroom, not the kids that were written about 30 years ago. And I think, like I said, the kids don't know that they should ask for it, and they don't know what's missing. But when you give it to them, and when you give them a fresh perspective and new books and new faces, and they see themselves in those books, it makes a huge difference. And I know we're going to talk about, helping kids find their way to reading and back to classrooms, and how to increase literacy, but that it can't be overstated that that's an integral part of it in curriculum, but also in the books that they're reading. So thank you for that awesome work.
Yeah, if anybody has something else to add on it, please feel free to jump in, interrupt, put on mute. I'll see you on mute and I'll instantly step back. But I did want to move to what Melissa was saying about, okay, so we have all these great resources. We're getting our shelves more diverse. We're incorporating librarians and publishers into getting the right books on the shelves for all types of patrons and experiencing those windows, those mirrors, like Shelley said. But how do we get kids reading? Especially after a pandemic where they've spent the better part of a year in a lot of cases schooling in front of a screen, reading in front of a screen. How do we get that sense of community, like Julie was saying, that sense of community space back into our libraries, that enthusiasm for literacy? It's a big question, and we're not going to come up with the end-all be-all answer, but I'd love to hear your thoughts.
I'm happy to jump in here. I feel pretty strongly that there's been a lot of talk about, kids falling behind, right? Best case, they've been homeschooled a year and a half. Worst case, they've had no Wi-Fi. All the doors have been shut. I don't know what they've been doing for a year and a half, but not what they normally do, right? They haven't had support. They haven't had family, maybe. And so there's been a lot of talk about, they're falling behind. They're going to be behind level. Behind what, I don't know. It's a global pandemic. We're all in this together. And I think it is critical that it is not punitive, right? They get back to school, they get back to those places, and it is a celebration that, we're on the other side of this, hopefully, that we're together, and that we can kind of, regain some sort of normalcy, and reading should be celebrated, and it can't be punitive, regardless of, where they are academically and how far maybe they have fallen behind. And I can't state that strongly enough. I feel like it's really disconcerting to me when I hear people, worried about like flashcards, and it's like, no, like this has to be organic. It has to be fun. They have been reading, a lot of them, right? I mean, they're reading digital books now if they didn't have access to hard books, regular books. And so the other thing I'll say is, I think the way you get them reading, after my years of teaching kids how to read, is to get them talking. kids are generally, even the shy ones, if you ask them something about something that they're interested in, they're not shy anymore, whether it's Pokemon or, why do dogs dream, or why do we fart, right? Like, they have a story to tell you. They have lots of questions all the time. And I think we need to, as people who, are in charge of their literacy in many ways, we have to remember that they'll tell you what they're interested in. And I think we have to be open-minded, and we have to be not punitive, and we have to meet them where they are. And we have to lead them to information and books, whether it's or magazine articles that they are interested in, that it's organic for them to want to read.
I'm going to piggyback on that real quick for my commercial, that board games and certain video games are just as important to a learning process that, books are. I love books, but also, like, if you look at the way kids adapt and learn these days, it is not necessarily just straight dictation. Reading, in terms of just like reading comprehension, just put a rules board for a board game in front of a kid, and that teaches them logic, that teaches them strategy and puzzling. And I work on Minecraft books as part of my day job, and we do a ton of lesson plans behind it. But one of the most amazing things I think about Minecraft as a platform is that it's an open sandbox. And if you ever talk to a kid, Melissa, you talk, like, just listen to what a kid has to say. Listen to what a kid has to say about their Minecraft builds, and you will notice that they are, storytelling. They are, problem solving. They are creating their own worlds, and they're letting loose their imaginations. And I happen to think, and maybe I've been working on Minecraft books for too long, that is easily transferable to a love of reading. Taking that love of creation, that use of imagination, and showing them, like, beyond just the Minecraft video game, there, you can read stories in the Minecraft universe. And with the Magic the Gathering, it's the same thing. Like, when you are playing, trying to figure out the rules, you are reading and you are comprehending. And so, as we're looking at the future and what it means to, like, inspire a love of learning and reading kids, I think we have to be flexible in terms of the medium and the media that does the teaching for us. But I really liked your point, Melissa.
One of the first things that when I got back to SLJ from Book Ops, one of the things that I learned at Book Ops was that for a while there was this huge bias against graphic novels, which we know hopefully is on the way out. Maybe it's even trickled down to the parents, but also licensed books, books based on licensed characters, Paw Patrol, Disney, and Minecraft, and all of this. And often for a long time there was a bias against purchasing these type of books for the library, and it's only recently that it's been accepted, at least on this side, at least in the library that I worked at. We actually just published an article in SLJ about licensed books and why there shouldn't be a bias against them, because they get kids reading. Follow the kids' interest. We all talked about, why do we fart, that kind of thing. Grab that and find books all about that, and you'll get a kid reading, or at least interested about it. Find a graphic novel about it, find a magazine article, and follow the kids' interests, whether it be something that we buy in Dollar Tree, that's those 99 cents a books based on Minnie Mouse, or which is exactly what my daughter was reading for like a year and a half in a row. Or, it could be Eric Carle, whatever it is that they're interested in.
I agree with everything that's been said. And I really like what Julie and Melissa said about just making sure that reading is joyful, and that, kids are not made to feel bad for finding books that align with the things that excite them is so important. And the only thing that I will add is just, I think that diverse books are extra important for that same reason, that, like, if you give a young reader a book that reflects their reality, their identity, their life, that is going to be a book that maybe engages them in a way that like the standard curriculum books will not. And so that alone can go really far in building a love of reading, which I think is something that I am sometimes afraid that certain, like, very strict literacy approaches lose sight of just the fact that a love of reading is the most important takeaway that I think any of us can have. And I think the other component where like libraries can come into this is making books more than just like making reading more than a solitary thing. Like libraries can be places where people can come and meet their favorite author. They can be places where people can come together and have book clubs and meet other people who love the same types of books that they do. They can make reading a social event or like a meaningful in-person event when those things are safe again, or not in person if it's not safe, but they can make reading feel communal in a way that I think we're all kind of searching for that communal aspect right now, especially. So.
And again, speaking from going off what you're saying about like, we're in a transitory period right now. Some things are becoming in person, some things are still online. And we have learned a lot, I'm sure, in this last year about the pros and cons of working in this space. So I'd like to talk a little bit about that. What do you see as the pros and cons of your workspace as we begin to transition back to those in-person activities? And what can we take from what we've learned and put into our work days as we move hopefully past a time where everything is at home, everything is virtual, and into this sort of way that we're opening up non-punitive literacies, non-linear literacies, and how can we promote that? So I'd love to hear from any of you about that.
I can chime in with the easy piece, and that a huge part of my marketing job, because I was in science fiction fantasy, was centered around conventions. We would go to 6 a year, and it was a lot of traveling, a lot of shipment, a lot of booth setup. But the most valuable thing I got out of it was the chance to actually interact with readers myself, and be able to actually see them scan the shelf or scan the table and see what they picked up, the questions they kind of asked. So I really can't wait for that experience again. It was so rejuvenating, and it kind of reminded you, why you work on books in the first place is to bring joy to readers. But at the same time, these weren't always the most accessible places to meet readers, right? When you go to a convention, you have to pay money to get in. You have to be kind of centrally located in a large city. And what I loved about, the need to pivot during the pandemic year was that now we were hosting online events as the default, and people could tune in from like every single part of the country. It didn't matter if they were in a super rural area, they had access to their favorite authors and got a chance to meet them. And so my ideal, and I think everyone's struggling with this answer, is like, how do we get the best of both worlds? How do we sort of still get that energy of a real life event, but at the same time, make sure that we're still considering that not everyone has the privilege to travel and to attend those real life events at the same time? And how do we kind of keep those places equitable? So yeah, that's top of mind. That's what I think about literally every day.
The option, and this also overlaps with our ideas of inclusivity, right? At the library, I've been able to, during virtual programs, reach out to kids who I would never see because they might, have programs after school every day, so they don't come into the classroom, or all those different things. So having the opportunity to interact with those children who might not have the privilege or the opportunity to come into the library themselves is something that I really want to preserve going forward. And then also, I think there's the idea of energy. How do we preserve energy? How do we make sure that kids are not burned out on certain ideas, certain things, and how do we move forward in that way? So that's what I've been thinking about a lot as a public librarian. I'd love to hear about from Shelley, going forward with book selection, with programming, with reviewing. How are you pivoting in continuing to happen?
Yeah, of course. So at SLJ, we had this big book room where every single arc published by every single publisher would appear, or we come out of our boxes, and all we had to do, the editors, is scan the shelves and take this, take that, and send them out to our reviewers. Obviously, we can't do that anymore. So we had to create the virtual book room, which is still a work in progress, where publishers would now send us PDFs or links to NetGalley or Edelweiss, and then we would send them to our reviewers. It's still a work in progress because many of our reviewers don't want to review digitally, which I completely understand. Picture books, for example, they don't translate well to the digital medium. And so I'm looking forward to the day where we can do a mix, right? Obviously we save a lot of money, right? And shipping and all that, but it's just not the same. It's not the same. A plus though about this new workspace that we're in, as we know, publishing and librarianship is majority white, majority female, majority, upper middle class. And so now that essentially we can do our jobs, at least at SLJ, from our desks at home, we are shifting to making sure all of our positions are remote, or can be from a remote location. So that means it opens up the pool to more diverse candidates who can actually afford to have a publishing job instead of moving to New York or San Francisco or any of the other pricey centers, which I think is a good thing. And as publishing continues to make that type of decision, would then open up to more diverse candidates, would then hopefully mean more diverse books, which then would mean more children get to see themselves in the books that they ordinarily wouldn't have in the past. So this is good. It's good.
Yeah, we also recently were hiring for 2 new positions, and for the first time we opened those positions up to potentially remote candidates. So Lee and Low has never really been like we haven't had remote candidates for those positions before. And I think similar to what Shelley was saying, we are thinking about ways that publishing as an industry can become more inclusive. And New York just has so many barriers to entry. Like, it is such an expensive place to live. It's really difficult to make your way here if you don't have family or friends or a network. A lot of entry-level publishing jobs don't pay a ton, and especially if you're graduating and you have loans already, it's really, really difficult to enter the industry if you need to be located in New York. So I think that even if like 15 to 20% of publishing jobs became open to remote candidates, it could really change the landscape of the industry in terms of who is able to work in publishing, and make a really big difference in terms of like the perspectives that are represented.
I didn't know about that. That's really interesting to hear that publishing jobs are now opening up to remote positions, especially because you guys also did an audit of, or not an audit, a survey of the different kinds of diversity that you see in the publishing workforce. And while it's changed, it's increasing over the past, decade, it's still, like Shelley was saying, majority white, majority upper class, majority able-bodied, straight white women. So that's really wonderful to hear. Melissa, I'd love to hear about your perspective as a literacy instructor. Do you have any tactics from this past year that you're going to carry over into as we transition more to in-person?
I don't know. Teaching online, 2nd and 3rd graders was pretty rough. I love all of the free content that became available, like the Brain Pop and the Epic. There was so much stuff out there for kids to engage with. And I think it was new and fun and novel. I don't know. Maybe it'll be a mainstay, maybe some of it. It's really hard. It's really hard to teach phonics like in a mask on a screen. I don't I don't recommend it. I think, the kids are more independent. They're way more tech savvy. They know how to like pop a link in a chat and share a screen. And so they've definitely, they've learned some things, but, especially for the younger ones, I feel like, reading groups and, reading clubs and go in the corner and snuggle up. I know maybe I'm old school, but I think that's missing. I think it's great if you're, if you need to travel or if you, have a hard time getting to school, as an option to have an online environment. Though it's a lot of work for teachers to, be doing that and setting up and monitoring their online environment. I mean, that's definitely several jobs. But so I think that there will be some takeaways with regard to like the Google Classroom and some digital components that can supplement what's happening in person. But I guess in my mind for teaching, I feel like it's for the little ones, maybe. I don't know. It's better in the building, better all together. I don't know. I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah, you'd answered it. Absolutely. I mean, this is why we have these sort of panels with different perspectives. Like we see a lot of things that are carrying over maybe from certain industries, but in other industries, it's been an extreme burden to make this shift. And, you know, while we of course are going to have tactics and coping and ideas that are going to carry over, a lot of us are very maybe excited to get back to that, you know, previous situation, which is great. So talking about that and talking about the future, looking to the future, you've all talked about some projects that you have in the works now, some ideas that you're doing. I would love to hear more about the future of your partnerships between different communities in your industry and beyond, and what kind of dream projects you might see even further in the future. So yeah, if anybody has those, go ahead and jump in.
So I'll jump in here. You know, as a teacher and a mom, I'm really hoping that we have some fun. I hope that there are lots of book events and author events and poetry slams and all the things that kids like, and maybe even some things that they don't like or they didn't know that they liked. I think we just have to try lots of things and make lots of mistakes and just kind of get it back. I think, like I said before, the kids are pretty, they're lonely and they're kind of desperate to get back into a space with their peers. And I think we have a really exciting window. And I'm optimistic about how we're gonna help rebuild and the role that we're gonna play in that for our kids who have really been, you know, kind of ignored throughout this entire thing, right? I mean, if we think about it, like all the things that they're used to doing, it's just been locked up, you know, and for safety's sake, but they're still not even in school full time, a lot of them. So I think, yeah, I'm optimistic about everybody getting really creative and people jumping in that maybe didn't even know that they could play a role, right? Like call your school librarian, go into your public library. How can you volunteer? What do you know, everyone's got things that they're interested in and strengths and clubs that they could lead. And I think as a teacher, I'm always super grateful for parents who want to do that. And I think people are even more maybe open to it and welcome to it now.
So what I'm hearing kind of is like, you know, we can capitalize on the excitement of things happening again. Like perhaps even those kids who are like in the library every day, they start to get used to it. They're like, oh yeah, okay, this is part of our everyday thing. Now I've had a year where they haven't had those outlets. And so we can sort of capitalize on that excitement to return to things that were once normal that have now been out of their system for a while and continue moving forward with that. I really like that as a concept.
I think even we can try to like figure out where the other kids are, right? You open the library, you're going to have kids come back, right? I mean, some kids are going to go to the library, but where's everybody else? Like, what about the kids who never went to the library? Maybe now there's a new thing for them there that they didn't know about, and they're a little bit more willing to try it because they haven't really been doing too much. So I would think about too, like the kids who aren't asking for help, right? Who aren't maybe showing up, like where have they been? What are they doing? They might need us the most. Yeah.
The word that sticks in my head a lot these days is hybrid, which when you kind of like look at it, it's kind of scary sounding. It feels kind of alien-esque, like, oh, a hybrid. I recently was in an author event. I forgot to update my bio, Ali. My book, The Fearless Flights of Hazel Ying Lee, has been out. It's been out since March. I did a wonderful event with the Museum of Chinese in America in which, I did the read aloud, but then I thought it would be fun to walk them through making paper airplanes. And it was so difficult to explain to a child as they're holding up a piece of paper which way to fold the plane. She had folded it the entire side over, so it wasn't a plane, it was just a folded piece of paper. But in that moment in my brain, I was like, there's so many wonderful things about a digital event. Like I am able to go to an event, like I did library events in California and Chicago and New York, all in the same week over the course of May, things that I couldn't do because my publisher would never fly me out to 3 different places for a picture book, but I was able to reach all of these different audiences. And how do we take that, but then also have that in-person component that craft opponent, the chance for a child to like touch a piece of paper, manipulate it, and then also ask for help from a teacher that's right next to them and can tell them exactly what they did wrong. And if there was a way to bring that together, like I would love to continue to do more of these digital events and be able to have that flexibility to visit as many schools as I can, cram into a 24-hour period, regardless of a location. But then perhaps, in addition to that, there's an element that the child can still have with their friends, with their peers, with their teachers that can continue that lesson beyond what I'm able to do on screen. So that's kind of, as, we're looking at all of our jobs and, what we can do to increase literacy, increase that love of reading, is really like, we got to think in hybrid models now, as weird as it sounds, but I think there's an opportunity there to rethink what events used to look like, rethink what outreach used to look like.
Yeah, just building on what Julie said, I think there has been an equalizing effect to all events being virtual, because I think, within the publishing ecosystem, there were these really big books by really big name authors that had huge travel budgets, and everyone else, or books from smaller publishers like Lee and Low, and other independent publishers, had a hard time competing with that because travel is just really expensive, and it's not feasible to bring authors to 20 stops, 10 stops across the country. And so there was this like, not every book got the same chance to get in front of readers. And when events became fully virtual, that really changed. And I hope that we can keep the momentum of that kind of new equality going, even when we start to have in-person events again. And so I really like, what Julie was talking about in terms of a hybrid approach, that that maybe means that sometimes authors have, or sometimes events have both a virtual and an in-person component, or that authors can sometimes do a mix of both, and just something that continues to like maintain that accessibility that I think this has given us. That's really special.
And we only have a couple of minutes left. We did get our question in the Q&A section that we kind of touched on, but I want to put it out there in case you have anything else to add. Are there new elements of partnership between librarians and publishers having to do with the digital landscape as a response to all of us being online? We kind of talk about that, the idea of more activities being a possibility, but have there been any brand new sort of elements that you've seen pop up?
Well, someone did mention this, and I forgot who, but when I was at the library, there were so many free ebooks that were now available because we had already purchased all our summer reading materials when the pandemic hit. So we had warehouses full of books that we could no longer give to the kids. So, but we did want to continue the summer reading program in some way. So one of the things that we did, and thankfully we received so many donations to be able to purchase as many ebooks as possible. So many, we can go into a very long conversation about the pricing of ebooks, but we won't do that now. But there are some ebooks that are more expensive than others. And so many of the publishers gave us huge deep discounts so that we could purchase as many licenses as possible when it came to ebooks for both the schools that were now completely online, but also to the kids who want to read at home, or the resources for summer reading, and not just ebooks, but also I think Tumble Books, which is like a digital platform as well. So we just had a lot more resources, financial resources, in order to get materials to kids, which is a positive, and I hope continues.
All right, so we are coming up on the hour. I have one more question for all of y'all that kind of I've been thinking of as we've been going through this, for people who might be new to creating those partnerships, creating those bridges. So my question for you, and our final question probably, is where to start If you're a new person in a publishing industry, or a new person in a library, or a new mom, where would you start with sort of building that inclusivity? Where would you start?
Well, I would say that diversity audits are not just for big bookstores or libraries. Like, we could all just take a look at our own shelves, and the books that we purchase for others. Like when we go to a baby shower, when we go, when we're purchasing books for the holidays, what are the titles? Obviously, we're going to go back to Goodnight Moon and all those titles that we always do, but try your best to recommend and to purchase titles that are as diverse and inclusive as possible. The library is obviously the best place to start, because you have librarians who are really thinking about that more and more. And so, and then we as librarians should be the first ones to start thinking about that way. So I think the more that we kind of branch out of our usual little silo and the books that we always recommend, we continue to just check ourselves and make sure that we are recommending as many diverse possibilities as possible.
I also feel like we can't have this panel without also shouting out we need diverse books, and diversebooks.org is their website. Incredible resources, especially if you're starting out and you're not quite sure how to, what to do with the shelves, what to do with the buying process, and also which authors are out there. Like just over the past, I don't know how long I've been in publishing now, like 10, I guess I've more been working for 10 years. It just grew from this tiny grassroots organization to now it's just like a powerhouse of support and knowledge. And they really, I think, just set the standard and has done so much work. So for newbies out there, definitely check out that website.
Yeah, and I would just say wherever you find yourself, you can be an advocate, because there's work to be done at every single level. So whether, like Shelley said, you're a parent and you're shopping for books, or you are in publishing, in whatever department you're in, like conversations about inclusivity and representation and equity need to be happening simultaneously everywhere, and they impact every part of the job that we do, making books and connecting them with readers. So wherever you find yourself, there is work to be done that you can actively be a part of.
I'll also jump in. Kids love justice. And I think when you pose the idea that something that they've always been taught might not be the only story or the only perspective, you hook them. They want to know. They want to know the real story. They want to hear an alternative view. So I think you've got a good audience there. And so I think it's on us. It's on us to educate ourselves too, and make sure that they're getting, they're getting that education. My kids now are always like, well, what's your source on that? Where did you learn that? Like, is that from Wikipedia? I'm like, you guys, Wikipedia is okay sometimes, maybe verify, but you can't just. So I think that they want to know. They want to know. Yeah.
Well, that is all fantastic advice. So for all of y'all watching out here, these are some of the ways that libraries and publishers work together through programming, through purchasing, through ordering, through recommending, to work towards inclusivity in all of those spaces. And you, as whatever role or whatever role you have in literacy in your life, can continue to work towards that inclusivity as well, and look around for the partnerships that are in your community and beyond. Thank you to our speakers. It has been a pleasure speaking with you this afternoon or evening or morning, whenever you're listening. And I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day.
I just want to jump in and thank Alessandra. I want to thank you and everyone on the panel as well. So interesting, just thinking about this changing landscape. And I know you're all explorers in your own right as you do this, but the heightened level of consciousness about what we're doing right now, what we're giving to our kids out there is really fantastic to hear. And I applaud you all. And I will visit some of you in your libraries. So, so thank you for the time and everything else. We don't have another Big Neat program on the calendar quite yet, but please stay tuned to all of our social media, and we will let you know what we're up to again next for the next program. But this was terrific. And thank you for sharing all the links as well. So really excellent. I hope you have a lovely evening. And thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you guys so much.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.